Welcome to the Coach's Table podcast, where coaches come to grow personally and professionally through real-world application and online education. What's going on, everybody? Man, today is beautiful. It's a great day. There's a lot of things happening. Life is good. I'm just going to get right into this because I have an amazing guest that has a ton of experience, not just as a strength and conditioning coach, but across the spectrum that I think is stuff that a lot of people try to do, a lot of people try to implement, and he's actually done it successfully and has done it well. And so I'm super excited to have him on and hear from him and learn from him from that standpoint too, because it's not just strength and conditioning. It's also he's a business owner and then an author and then does courses and everything. So, and we're going to get into that in just a little bit. But guys, before I introduce him, do us a huge favor and share the show. If you learned something from this one or the previous shows, do us a huge favor, share the show. That's the only way the show grows. And that's every episode. That's not just one episode. That's for every single episode. And leave us a review. Okay. The review is the most important thing. What the review does is it tells other people that this is worth their time of listening. And it's actually something that they should listen to and get value from. So if you could leave the review as well. And if you aren't listening on the audio, but you are watching on YouTube, we drop the full length YouTube episodes. So go ahead and click subscribe on that. Would appreciate that very much. And without further ado, I have a former strength coach, business owner. He has his own podcast, author of 2 books, has a fantastic website with a ton of courses. Some would say a mentor in this field as well. Mr. Tim Caron, man, what's going on?
Hey, great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Man, I appreciate you coming on. Let's kind of start with so you were in the team setting, and then you went to the private sector, and then obviously you now co-own a business and everything from that standpoint. But let's start with the strength coach stuff, and then we'll go to the business world, because I think that's really interesting and valuable as well, because those are skill sets that a lot of people are like, what do I need? How do I do these things? And they don't really know and understand how to do that. But your time as a strength coach, I mean, if nobody's been on your website, I think they're missing out tremendously. There's a ton of free value.
Completely agree.
But no, I mean, I'm being very honest with you. Like, there's a ton of free value on there. And you have a bunch of other things to offer them as well. But the value just from the blogs that you consistently do, the podcast that you consistently do as well. What was your initial thought when you were a strength coach? Did you ever think like, man, I'm going to own a business, I'm going to write books, I'm going to do all those things and be an educator in this space?
Yeah, I think so. I think I did. One of the areas that as you start to traverse your career and figure out what you want, you set benchmarks and goals. And obviously the first one for me was being a head strength coach in Division I level. And I was pretty locked in on that. I was assistant strength coach at several places, and I was always thinking from that head strength coach backwards. How is this going to help me? How is this going to make me more prepared? Then the other end, it's okay. Well, once you reach that milestone, what's next? And I think there's an element. There's a lot of money involved with being a head strength coach, which is sweet. It's nice, but then there's another moment of it hasn't gotten me thus far. Like chasing the money never really got me what I ultimately wanted, which, to be completely frank, it's really important. However, when you do get that 6-figure salary and a house, and you start to look at it from the context of what makes you happy, what gives you purpose and meaning. Well, I like what I really focus on in terms of making people around me better in general, making environments or situations better. I like challenges. I like not knowing the answer and then working through it till you find the answer, or at least an answer in that moment in time that helps you get through that period. I like challenges that make you really work for it, right? This element of, if it was easy and you knew it was just a matter of step-by-step process and you just wear it down, that's okay. That's fine. Like losing weight, like it's going to be a deficit. It's going to be hard work over a period of time. Like those are worthy challenges and they're good. And I like those as well. But I really, really like ones that don't have a concrete definitive path or answer. And that's where I start to, I guess, get really excited. And not saying I get bored with things or get disinterested in stuff, but I start to get anxious when I feel like I cracked the code or I figured something out and I'm looking for something else. And a lot of circumstantial stuff has changed since then, but I have a family now, and I have some other obligations that I have staffs that I have to really focus on. So that anxiousness of being out of college for 3, 4 years and waiting for the next step, or getting a football scoop and looking at what's coming open. Could I see myself there? Do I know anyone there? That doesn't
Yeah.
happen as much anymore because I have kids, I have a wife, I have 25 employees that I have to be dependable for. And then I have my website and listeners and subscribers that you
Mhm.
have. The whole thing is like you have to put that pressure and onus on you. But before that all became I have a responsibility and obligation, it became I don't know how to own a business. I don't know how to start a podcast. I don't know how to write a book. And that was exciting to me. And that's now I'm on the other end of it of hopefully recouping whatever losses it takes to write a book or start a podcast or start a business. And I think that's a different challenge. But then there's also too, I have a lot of people have expectations and standards for me that I need to uphold. And now I have a different focal point and a different energy and enthusiasm to people believed in me, people invested into me, people have a certain expectation of me. And like I like that pressure now too. So at one point it was all about what's the next step or what's the biggest benchmark to justify being successful. And then the other end, it was like, all right, what's new and exciting and how can I do something that I've never done before, forge paths that I haven't yet walked or gone down. And then now it's okay, well, I have responsibility to a lot of people that made some sort of decision in me and believed in me. And that's a great responsibility. And I feel empowered by that. So, a lot of evolution in my personal life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is fantastic because there's a lot of I talk to a lot of coaches, strength coaches as well that are young in their career, or some that are older and have been around for a while, which is great. And it's interesting because now when you were going through being a strength coach, you're a little bit older than myself, but social media wasn't around, right? And so it wasn't a thing that you would go on all the time, and you wouldn't have to worry about posting or whatever. But one of the biggest misconceptions, and one of the biggest, I'm going to say, limiting factors that a lot of the people put on themselves that you just kind of did the opposite of, is they're like, well, I don't want to post something and nobody like it, and I'm scared of what people think of me, or I'm scared of what they'll say. And you kind of took the opposite approach. You're like, you know what, fuck that. Like, I'm gonna try it, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna learn it, and I'm gonna make it better, and I'm gonna make it really good. And it's been successful. But it's really interesting. I'm like, just put it out there. Like, who cares, but there's so many people that are so caught up in, like, what do other people think, what are I could, there's so many people. You ask them, hey, do you think you'll ever write a book? And they're like, no, I would never do that. And it's like, well, why would you ever put that limitation on yourself? Maybe, maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't, but like, we just put so much limitations on ourselves, and yours is just the opposite of that. It's almost been, I've done this, I've done this really well. I'm kind of bored. What else can I do? Oh, now I've done this. Okay, well, that's going really well. Now what else? And all the skill sets in which you learn throughout that process is extremely valuable, because we get sucked down to this one track mind of like, well, I know how to do strength and conditioning. And to your point, you might say, well, do you? Because you wrote an entire book on saying how to become a great strength coach. And a lot of people probably haven't read it. And a lot of people are just doing the same stuff year in and year out, year in and year out. And it's like, well, is that what makes you good? Are you
Yeah.
even good then? And it's questioning that personal and professional development component of it, which a lot of them struggle with from that standpoint, because maybe they are status quo, maybe they are content, and then they get stuck in the rut per se. So it's really interesting from that standpoint. From that, what would you say, as you've transitioned from on the floor coaching to where you are now, what skill sets do you think were the hardest for you to learn throughout that time, and then on the opposite, which ones do you think were the most beneficial for you to learn?
Well, I would say more so characteristics or character traits.
Mm,
Where do you attribute success to? And a big point of the book, How to Become a Coach, was there's a very poor definition of what's good because we're
yeah.
predominantly judged subjectively. A football coach deems us worthy more times than not as a head strength coach. And I'm not trying to diminish a lot of head strength coaches out there that are incredibly talented and really skilled. And I think some of the areas that most of the there's two ends of the coin here. There's the cerebral type that's very much show the prove it, objectively show it, and then there's more of the subjective person that's going to be judged off of their people skills or their ability to connect to others. And in a lot of dynamics and situations, they're so exceptional in the people skills or the objectivity aspect of it all. It's not this binary classification, kind of everyone blends in the middle, but this, what is good? And someone might be off the charts in connecting to athletes and speaking to coaches and motivating, inspiring. Someone might be off the charts in terms of writing programs, looking at data, writing a really effective prescription based off of all this information.
This episode is sponsored by TeamBuilder. TeamBuilder is the #1 performance platform for strength coaches around the world. Their software provides coaches with an elevated experience when it comes to program development, data tracking, and staying connected with athletes and clients. Coaches also have access to consultations with TeamBuilder's in-house sports scientists to help manage and analyze data. Head to teambuilder.com and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial. That is TeamBuilder, TeamBuildr.com, and sign up with promo code TABLE to start your free 30-day trial.
And both of those are noble and worthwhile skills. But there's a really poor definition of who's better, and there's a really poor description around what is a really good strength coach. And when you're writing the book, it's a big attempt, but it's an attempt to say it depends on what the circumstances is or the context is, what is really good, right? So if you have a person that's exceptional with communication and incredibly like skilled in understanding people and nuance and reading situations and being just really compelling and interesting, they might be better served as a head strength coach making 7 figures and being a recruiting asset as well as being an influencer and be able to make a lot of money that way, or public speaking and motivational speaking. And then on the other end of the coin, hey, if I was really going to say where I'm really happiest and where I find the most joy, it's the programming aspect. And if I was going to tell you what my whole agenda was all along, it was basically just being able to write programs and do things that I really enjoy, like writing programs or writing programs. And I feel like I'm really good in that. So when someone asks if I'm a good strength coach, I say yes, but I also know what I'm really good at. And I know what my focal point is and what makes me complete and whole. And if you need me to talk in front of a group or talk to a coach or talk to a recruit or get up in the luncheon and talk to some donors and boosters, I can do that. And it's always a pleasant surprise as how good I am at that, but it's not where I'm really that vested into or what I'm really focused on. And I knew it was an area that I needed to work on, so I did. And I read a lot of books and I went through a lot of courses and I went through a lot of things that make me a more compelling and interesting speaker. And I take feedback. I get feedback all the time on how good of a public speaker I am. But it's not something that as I'm going through it. And I know that probably sounds ironic considering I have a podcast, but more along the lines of I wanted a podcast to have a voice and to talk about all the things that I know and talk to the people that I really respect and appreciate their take on something. So it's almost a very visual journal off of me keeping meticulous notes on process of learning, strength and conditioning, and physiology and biomechanics and programming, etc. That process unfolds. Like I know what I'm really good at. So when I'm looking at characteristics, it's finding that out. On top of where I'm really good at, you also know you need to know your weaknesses. And in certain situations, your weaknesses are not as visible. Meaning, like if I'm working in college strength conditioning and if I'm so good at this particular aspect that's really admirable to the person above me. One of the things that I was evaluated on Army West Point was my energy and enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And when I'm on the floor, I am having a great time. I feel like the haze in the barn. I've done all the leg work. I've done all the prep work. You can ask anyone who's ever worked for me that we are meticulous with setting up a program. So when we do get to the point where it is coaching that program, it is our game day and we should let loose and we should have fun and we should engage with our athletes and we should have as much of experience because not only do we have a shared experience of knowing just how hard and challenging these programs are, but we also understand that the work has been done so we can really go out there and give great energy and enthusiasm to do it. So when people look at what it is, it's like, oh, that's just an energy guy or a juice guy. And that's fine. If you want to classify me, just pay me my 6 figures. But on the other note, it gets into this thought process of I can do that because of the work that it is. And that's where the real ones know. They know the detail and the nuance I have in that program
Yeah.
and the progression and the regressions and all the things that make that program really work. They understand that that's didn't happen on accident, and it happened from absolute grinding it out from months in advance to get that thing prepared, ready to go. Now, in a actual private sector, when I'm owning a commercial business, whatever latitudes or whatever things you figure out how to, engineer or understand the constraints of what makes you good or bad in that environment kind of gets thrown out the window when you're in a private sector,
Yep.
where it might be heavily weighted towards being really charismatic or interesting and less actually valuable to have something really good as a product or a
Yeah.
thing that can actually make you better or lose weight or run faster, whatever the dynamic you're trying to create with your product or program, that might not necessarily be as valuable. Doesn't make it less valuable overall. It just makes it potentially short term less valuable to that person you're trying to attract as a member or as a paying customer. It might make you less interesting in certain mediums like social media. There's dynamics at play, and that's where you got to check your ego and your definition of your job of what I really do. I make people better. I keep them safe. I have always a high performance environment. I'm really good at coaching on the floor. That might not be as important when you own a business. And there's other elements of, okay, well, I have to manage others and I have to make sure that the wheels are spinning in the right direction. I got to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
we're titrating up or down energy and enthusiasm to get someone new that's interested, but also, too, that same person not make them feel overwhelmed or intimidated and whatever value prop I have. And the interesting part, it's how much you're comfortable being the role that you're playing. Like I was the pit bull at USC when I was there. I had to punish everyone and have to get out to everybody's ass and make sure that everyone was doing everything right all the time.
Sure.
And in the Army, I was more of a, okay, well, I gotta get people in place for that, but I gotta make sure that when the moment does hit, I need to be that guy. Now, as a business owner, the proverbial dropping a hammer and being the assertive, dominant force that you need to be in college strength conditioning, that's not something that's valuable. And
Yep.
I had to adjust. And it could be, well, you know how important I am in this previous area that I was in, and how I was able to make an impact through skill and perseverance and just complete dominating of that situation to now that maybe is not as revered or is necessary, quite frankly, counterproductive. And that's where
Yeah.
you really need to evolve and understand the nuance of the job. And going back to the book of, well, what do you want to do? And what do you need to be, what are you good and bad at, and then what do you need to improve upon, and what do you need to focus on? Like, I look at it from what is your perfect day and define that to me. And a lot of young folks, young strength coaches are like, well, I want to have a morning routine and I want to go through these steps and I want to always make sure I have time to work out and I want to do that. Like, then you should be an influencer and you figure out YouTube and Instagram and TikTok algorithms, and you should figure out what's going to sell and get a lot of views, because that's going to award you that opportunity to do that. Well, I
Right.
want to work with elite level athletes. Then you're going to have to maybe be really good with people and start to work the angles of getting with those athletes, because it's more about who you know. Or I just want to make people better. And the one thing that I always find when you ask someone, why do you want to do this and what do you want to do? They're always disjointed. They never have synergy. The what and the why are always disconnected. And the
Mm.
classic example of, like, I want to help people, I only want to work with elite level athletes. You're not helping them, you manage them. If you ever work with elite
Yeah.
level athletes, you understand that pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah, they're
On the other,
elite already for a reason. You know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
they're already pretty elite. So you're it's not that you can't help them be better. You are, but like you're saying, you're managing them more so than you are like pushing them to a new threshold.
but there's a whole group of people that need your help,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of them. And quite frankly, there's a lot more people that need your help than don't. And if you look at those folks that need your help and you go, I want to help people as my why, and you target a group that needs your help, adult gen pop or youth athletes, then you have synergy. You have this perfect blend of why you're doing it and what you're doing or what you want to do. And if you have that figured out, the rest of that path is really easy. Now, if those are really disjointed of, I want to help people and I want to work with a specific population that's really elite, you might need to, you're going to have a really rough and hard road, and I
Yeah.
think that process and reverse engineering that, because the truth is, working that elite level, like, you got to be able to get in with sports agents, or you got to be really dynamic with certain people that I don't need someone to make me faster or stronger. I just need someone I trust and I like. And
Yeah.
that's not bad. And that's, quite frankly, it's not easy to do for a lot of strength and conditioning coaches. And that's why there's certain
Mm-hmm.
people who have that opportunity and a lot don't. But that's where it comes down to, of like having a conversation, an honest conversation of what's your day what is your day that you want to be or have look like. And I want to work with this group, or I want to have this schedule, or I want to live in this area, or I want to do this. And what's your why? Well, it's this. And then when we start to have conversations like, well, how much of those connected? And if we're going to start to talk about how hard it's going to be having disconnected or disjointed relationship between your what and your why, and we just got to go through this process of really breaking you down and going, well, why do you want what you want, and why are you doing this in the first place, and just start getting to the root source. And it's always some cliche story about some strength coach helped me, or I wasn't very good and I was overcome some sort of obstacle in my own personal development, or I just really honestly I see now that there's 2-3 strength coaches making 7 figures, or I see articles or I see publications bringing up strength conditioning. I think it'd be a pretty cool job. And I mean, that's the real elephant in the room. It's got more notoriety and recognition. It's going to have more people interested in doing it. And there's more potential to make a really high number. And the area that we talked about in the book is we're going to evaluate 1 million as a potential, but it's like winning the lottery. And you start to look at the median. Okay, that could be 500,000 now, but the reality is we're working towards the mean, which is the average. It's going to be about 40 to 50. So the majority of your career, or the majority of the people in our industry, are going to have a lifetime earnings of about 40 to 50K a year. And is that bad? Is that good? Is that disjointed from the fact that we're going to have to put maybe 1-2 master's degrees in place to get that $50,000? And if you're going to look through that, like, I want to have a family, I want to have a home, I want to live in this area. Like, you don't need a master's degree to make $50,000. You can do that pretty much doing anything at this point. You need
Correct.
to really want to do this, and you really need to understand that this is a labor of love, and the chances or the probabilities of you getting $1 million a year is like winning the lottery. Not saying it's impossible, but it's a small chance, and there's a lot of variables that need to go in your way. And saying it from a person that's made it to a head strength coach job, and there's only 135 of us in the world at one point. And then as a business owner, it didn't fail in the first or the third year. There's like these windows that I can kind of address and saying, yeah, I could tell you that was lucky in a lot of situations. It was a lot of hard work. It was a lot of strategy. It was a lot of learning from mistakes and then pivoting and understanding what I need to be differently in the future. Which, these conversations too. And then the one other element I'll bring up from the book is this: everything happens so rapidly in strength conditioning. Like you angle up and you phase up into your career, and you're always looking for a next job, but then the level off is not there, right? You reach an apex and then it drops off quickly. So anyone ever asked me about why did I leave the team sector, it's how many 55-year-old head strength coaches do you see? You get aged out way too early. It's almost like on the trajectory of being a professional athlete. The issue, though, is our lifetime earnings for being a strength coach is majority spent in this 40 to 50K range, and we have a small window where we can make 6 figures and above. So that $125,000 a year Army potentially was very short-lived, and that's not going to be FU money for the rest of my life. I'm not going to be able to retire as soon as my boss decided I was no longer good or worthy. So what are my next steps? Maybe I'm not as valuable as an assistant because I might be stepping on toes, or I might make that head strength coach insecure. Or maybe I lost the network because I got locked into school and I don't have the reach that I once did from other coaches saying, oh man, I got to get me some whatever Tim Caron can bring. So you start to really look at it from, I reached that apex and then it's a drop. It's a massive drop. So I wanted to look at options and figure out what my other things are. But the other part, which is wild, is most industries are based off of obtained wisdom from people that have been in it and plateaued at the higher ranks and distilling that down. And we just removed it. Like, you can ask, I guarantee if you ask anyone at the age of 25 just leaving their grad program or undergrad program, some of the legends of the industry, even as late back as 2010, are probably not even on their radar. They're probably not even recognizable names. And that's crazy. That's a really interesting phenomenon that our industry really has. And you start to look at it, we have no benefit of wisdom. It's pretty locked in on 7 figures or high notoriety based positions, stepping over your dead grandmother to get a job or an internship. And then you look at the next phase of, okay, well, there's no one tempering bad decisions. There's no one giving some sort of insight of like, hey, here's what we should have done differently in that situation. And then you have on the other end, you have a bunch of disenfranchised people that got aged out way too early. They were
Yeah.
forced to step into another role, go into a selling of equipment or selling real estate, whatever it is that they had to violently transition to. Now looking at them as, oh wow, that person doesn't get it, or they're young and
Sure.
dumb, and they didn't pivot fast enough, or they didn't have the realization that this is a very
Mm-hmm.
small window that you can actually do this for. You need to start developing contingencies and backup plans. You can't
Yep.
just ride this wave forever, and that becomes this very interesting and very problematic setup to our industry as a whole. Young people don't know what this is leading into. Old people angry and disenfranchised, and they're divided, and they're getting on Twitter and arguing, and this kid doesn't get it, this kid's an idiot, that guy's just old and dumb. He's the adages that are created from this, and the stereotypes and the stigmatisms. And then you look at it from this other dynamic. We're subjectively assessed by a lot of sport coaches that are saying, that's my guy. That's my guy.
Yep.
And they have no real, I've never asked what my certifications credentials are when I met with a football coach or a basketball coach. It was mostly just, you identify the characteristics and the traits that I like. And that, okay, once I realized that's it, okay, well, it's a beauty pageant. I'm going to show that off and not necessarily go into the other areas that make me a better strength coach. And, young strength coaches that keep getting passed over, and soon they become an old strength coach that's never got that opportunity. They always become bitter. And like, you're the idiot, didn't realize what the job was. It's impressing people that are very, very volatile and very, very limited access to knowledge of what's good or bad with us. They're judging it on their own appraisal. A lot of times they're athletes' feedback, and you have this confrontational relationship with your athletes or assistant coaches or maybe athletic trainers. Like, okay, maybe that coach goes, that's the dog. He's going to get after everybody and make sure he's throwing a tight ship. Or maybe he's like, I don't want to put out fires that person's constantly having arguments with. And, these are all dynamics that are playing out. And that was a big part of the book. It's spelling that out. It's, the industry is what it is. It's good and bad. You need to come from a foundation of like, I really want to do this because I genuinely believe this is my best chance to make a dent in the universe. And then understanding, having synergy between your why and your what. But then once you do figure out what you want to do and why you're doing it, it's still a lot of dynamics that are confusing and really don't make a whole lot of sense. And you have to be comfortable with that, and you have to be able to adapt to that. And not saying you need to be on the front end of, okay, the job's going south, we're 3-9, about to get fired and start looking out for other jobs. Not saying that you need to like pivot and go to the team sector or the private sector because, this is no longer working out and they don't get how good I am. It's just being strategic with the decisions you make for overall what you want to do and why you're doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That was a absolutely beautiful explanation for those of you that have not taken the time to read the book, because what he lays out is what what you just said there is what, if someone's going to come be an intern, that is the level of thought process that they need to have before they even say, okay, is this something that I want to do? Because you're exactly right. What it is it's fun, it's flashy. I get to work with Division I athletes. I get to, get all these perks per se, right? The gear, the logo, the blah, 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 whatever. But there's a realistic business component behind it that if you are not well prepared for, and if you're not strategically thinking about not just present day, but a year down the road, 3 years down the road, you're going to end up hurting yourself. And like you said, you're exactly right. Like, the majority of them, make 40, 50, maybe $60,000 for the majority of their career. And then they pop off for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and they might make a couple $100,000. Great, cool. That's awesome. But like you said, that's not FU money. That is like, well, I should have been making this 7 years ago, right? Like, you kind of feel like you delayed on it, right? But to your point exactly, is like, you are subjectively based off of people that don't even understand your basic level of understanding, right? And told whether you're good or bad. And like you said, like, then you're confrontational with the athletes. I was just having this conversation with a friend, and it was like, understand our role is that athletes that we work with probably have always been told, you're the best, you're so good, you're so amazing, you're so this, you're so that. And then you put them in the context of working with a strength coach, and what do we do? Hey, you're not doing this right. You got to do this harder. You're not giving effort. You're not that good, blah, 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 right? And so there's a natural confrontation there, because you're maybe the only one telling them, like, you're not as good as what you think you are. Or if you want to get to this next level, you need to do this, which is going to require X, Y, and Z, which requires a lot of hard work and effort on their part. But everybody else that they work with, like, if this is not hating on my athletic trainers, but when they go to the ATs, what are they told to do? Lay there, hey, lay there, I'll take care of you. There's no effort or minimal effort from the athlete standpoint. But then, a strength coach is supposed to set the standard, and they're supposed to hold their ground, and they're supposed to do all this stuff. But then if they go to a sport coach and the sport coach doesn't value any of that, well, everything that you do try to do in any sort of standard or environment or culture or whatever word you want to throw in there, that you are trying to create goes completely away, because the sport coaches are the ones that essentially run it and make that type of environment. But if they don't value that, again, back to the subjective component to it, then all your hard work, effort, and the stress that you put on yourself for trying to uphold that gets completely tossed out the window, because you say, hey, let's go to practice, and guess what? They don't care if they're late. They don't care what they're wearing. They don't, emphasize some of the points you're trying to emphasize. And so then you always feel like it's an uphill battle, because you feel like it's uphill with the athletes, and then you feel like it's uphill with the staff. And then you're like, well, wait a minute, like what are we trying to do here? And now you add in there the transfer portal, right? Which makes things even more chaotic at times and complex. And so it's really interesting. And to your point, yeah, like, you got to say, is this something that I really want to do? Do I want to constantly battle back and forth between this all the time? And then to what point and when am I going to make that jump to hopefully get paid what I should be paid from the jump? Probably, especially if you have multiple master's degrees. So the education component is there from a certification standpoint, but everywhere else, it's just a constant battle. And it's like, then you try and go and ask for a raise, and they say, here's $5,000. And you're like, well, that's a slap in the face. That's disrespectful. Like, what are you talking about? And you're there the earliest, and you're there the latest, and you're the first one to get fired. You're the first one to get blamed. And so it's a really interesting dynamic career field, industry, and thought process. Because you're right. Like, guys will be like, that's my guy. And he could not be good based off what you and I think is good. But if a coach or somebody else or a player says, hey, this is my guy, it's like, well, you could be missing the boat too, but I like him, and he manages me well, and he's fun to hang out with. And that's what could keep him around too.
For sure.
Yeah. It's it's really interesting. One thing that you said too, or at least that you wrote in your blog, which I struggle with this at times too, but is because I'm in the military, I've been in leadership roles. I'm in leadership roles. Like, I'm a commander right now, so I have like 111 people, blah, blah, whatever. And so, like, I'm always wanting to be in the know and being in the planning process, because it's like, I don't think this stuff is that difficult from a planning standpoint, right? Because we have all these known variables, but we take forever to make decisions on them, which is mind blowing to me. But you said, or at least you wrote, you said, if you wanted to be more involved with decisions, you should have picked another career path. And I was like, yeah, that's a fair statement to say, because a lot of times we are not in the planning aspect. We're not in the decisions aspect at all, really. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit more?
I think the area that most strength and conditioning coaches really struggle with is the notion that they have more information and that makes them more valuable,
Mm,
whether that comes in the form of knowledge or obtain knowledge or effort to obtain that knowledge, or even just the collection of information. And there's a dynamic at play in any system that there's going to be people that really the responsibility falls on, the who's going to write in the paper or go on as some sort of syndicated television network blaming that failure, right? 4th and 1, coach decides to go for it,
hmm
fails, and he's like, well, analytics told me to go for a 4th and 1 inside the 40. Like that dynamic is, it doesn't really, the guy who told him to go for it on 4th and 1, and because analytics isn't getting that I mean, the same thing with strength and conditioning coaches, right?
Right.
We're collecting all this information and we work our ass off to do it, and then the other end, we are busting our ass in the off season or even like in small windows to try to obtain as much information as possible. And if we're going to look at the algorithm of what social media between Instagram, YouTube, TikTok sees with strength conditioning coaches, you'll see a very ravenous group for information. Like the joke is, I am very keenly aware that when I put out a book and I'm going to give away a PDF, that's going to be pirated several times over. Now,
Sure.
there's a play there on my end. I know that that's going to get more of a network effect. And if I do have only for purchase items, that the potential for those to go up is there. Now,
Mhm.
when that goes into the other aspect of, we have this very, very secular closed loop of group that we become almost elitist within, and we become very much so like the top dog within a very small, non-influential group. And
Mhm.
if anything, if you're a strength conditioning coach and you could be a head strength coach, open up a business tomorrow, and then you're going to be unpleasantly surprised by how little people care and how little people are going to line up to sign up for your gym or take your offering. And it goes into,
Yeah.
that's your real
Yeah.
influence, man. And that's the perspective. It's, you're asked to do a job, and it takes time to win over influence, and you have to really understand windows where you can make an impact, and there's going to be really small and they're going to be really temporary. And that, as a central theme, is really hard for a group that works so hard and it's going to be really committed to their own education and their own knowledge and their own development. Now, I would argue a lot of what I see from an educational standpoint is just an aggressive form of productive procrastination. Like, we circulate the same resources that we already know or inherently understand. Like, if you're going to
Yeah.
read another
Yeah.
motivational coach book, like, I'm going
Yeah.
to say you're just wasting time. Like, don't post about you read another book
Yeah.
that you already knew the concept, right? There's a book by Maxwell. It's like business ethics, and the first line is, there's no such thing as business ethics, and it's just ethics. Like,
Yeah.
you already got the book. You already know what the book's about. Like, you could just throw
Yeah.
that book in the red pile because you already got the cliff notes right there. You don't need to read that to confirm whatever bias or notion you already knew to begin with. So
Mhm.
I would argue that effort without really much accomplishment gives a certain sense of I'm really working hard and I'm really, really valuable, but
Mm.
you're not.
Mm.
Like, you just basically perpetuated the same already idea that you had established to begin with. Now, in regards to these windows, your preparedness, like the adage of, when luck is the opportunity and preparedness kind of continuum or setup, that, hey Tim, what do you think? That's a window, and that's a big window, a big opportunity to really optimize that window. And when you get that question, you have a ramble on or kind of mumble through that, you'll never get that window or opportunity again. And were you really prepared? Like, you had that moment, and do you
Yeah.
really score through the research? Do you really score through your data? Do you really score through and have a really good finger on the pulse of your team? So when you do get that question, you're ready. And that's what
Mm.
you're doing. You're collectively waiting for your window of opportunity, and your preparedness really says whether, or your ability to prepare really determines whether that has actually influence. And I could tell you multiple stories, which I talk a lot about in the book, but that's where I think most people get screwed up on. It's, you have small windows, they're very temporary. If you screw it up once, you'll never get that same opportunity again. And it's only your fault. And you could argue you're busting your ass all year to learn and grow. I would argue you're probably wasting it on time that's better served with things you don't really understand, or a thing that's going to make you more prepared for when that time comes. And if you have a job to do of understanding the physiological readiness, their biomechanical readiness, their
Yep.
their psychological readiness, and you have just a triage of information on them, and you go, I can source last 6 months of wellness right there. I can tell you when we start to get to bye weeks that our wellness drops. I can tell you when we get to bye weeks, we go 5 days
Mhm.
in a row of full
Mhm.
pack practice and our acute spike loads go up. I know when injuries start to occur before they're happening. Tim, why do you think we're gassed going in this game? Because we busted our ass during bye week, or we haven't
Yep.
had a day off in
Mhm.
3 weeks, or you're just crushing them constantly. So every day their wellness, specifically their mood and their overall motivation's down. We've been
Mhm.
cranking on them and with no reprieve. We never thrown them a bone. That's when you win. And that's when you have
Yeah.
more influence. And then you start getting that question circulate a lot more, and you'll start getting a lot more serious questions of, hey, this guy's about to get cut. We don't really want to cut him. We want someone to step up. Tim, what do you think? And you go, okay, well, here's the moment. I can cite several things, and I've saved several athletes from getting cut on our team or just completely abandoned because I have several things that go in that guy's favor. And you want to win over a
Yeah.
position coach, get to bat for a guy and have definitive concrete evidence that that athlete's worth fighting for. You want to win over a head coach, really show that you are prepared and you know what you're talking about when you're asked in front of the room, because they are extremely intimidated by the fact that they have someone who's not competent as a coordinator. And when they go to you and they say, what do you think? And you stammer and you mumble, and you don't have a really good answer, and you say cliche things like it's all about work ethic. It's just, the team that
Yeah.
works harder will win.
Yeah.
You're never going to get that window again, or you're going to be
Right.
typecasted as just a moron in t-shirt and shorts with just big traps. And that's
Yeah.
that's a problem that a lot of these strength coaches that we deal with that are frustrated by this are really the only ones to blame. And if I don't want to knock any seminars or conferences, but if you already know what they're going to talk about, if you already have an idea of what that information is entails, you're probably not challenging yourself. So one of the mentions that I talk about in the book is continuing education should be centered around a couple things. You don't already understand it. You don't know everyone that's there, so you're not confirming your own bias. And the other part, are you really complementing an underdeveloped or really under time spent or not enough time spent skill or insight into your program? And they'll say that I do want to work with sports science and I have very limited accessibility to hardware and software. Go out there and find that information. Or let's say that I really want to understand this aspect of mobility and flexibility and return to play. Go out there and learn. I want to learn the speed aspect. I want to learn the strength conditioning aspect. Awesome. Go out there and learn it and accentuate a skill. But going in there and having a conference with really little to gain from, like the adage of you just learn one thing, like to me, that's not worth $3,000, whether it's the time spent.
Yeah.
There's if I just learn one thing, I just wasted $3,000. Like that one thing better be really good. If not, I better get outside and go somewhere it's going to be more value to me and help me get what I want eventually.
Right. Okay. So with that, then, with the increase in technology that we have at our disposal as strength coaches now, what I see, at least the pulse that I get from a lot of strength coaches, is to, they use it, but they don't understand it, or they use it, but they don't understand how to read it, or they use it, they understand how to read it, but they don't understand how to communicate it. Like, there's multiple problems inside the data analysis or the sports science world as well, because it's brand new. Obviously, it's literally brand new. So my question to you then is, do you think that is worthwhile for people to continue down the road, from an objective standpoint? Because I agree with your statement of, like, you get very few opportunities to show not only your worth, and I don't mean that from that perspective, but hey, to show what we have been doing in regards of utilizing this technology does tell a story, and it does help us here, or it doesn't help us here, or this player is good here, whatever the case may be. And a lot of coaches, the point that I'm getting to is, a lot of coaches will say, well, that is not valuable, or they don't value that here, or I don't know how to do that, or I'm not interested, or whatever the case may be. And it's like, okay, well, that's fine. However, that could be your only way to show that this is an unbiased opinion. And that's kind of my big thing to hang on with objective stuff, is it's an unbiased opinion, right? Because subjectively, like, I could say, oh yeah, he does a great job, he works harder, he doesn't show up on time, whatever. And they probably all already know that to begin with, right? But if I have these opportunities to say, hey, what is your thought on this? Or where do you think we should go? Or why do you think we're training them so hard? Or why do you think, injuries are increasing, whatever the case may be? And you actually back it up with objective stuff that you can access on the spot. To me, that's extremely valuable. And like you said, it's your preparedness for that moment that shows, hey, this is why I think this. Or you have these consistent and constant conversations, which I would hope would be happening, like on a weekly basis. So you have more of those opportunities at least, and you can get ahead of that curve and be more proactive with it rather than reactive. But from your perspective, do you think that's kind of a worthwhile thing for strength coaches as an additional skill set? Or do you think that some of them are just like, hey, kind of roll your dice if you're unwilling to play ball on being strategic with your career?
I just want to clarify the question. It was, should we
Like,
adhere to doing sports science?
Yeah, essentially, do you think for more strength coaches that is a better benefit for them from a time perspective
Yeah.
if they want to maximize these small opportunities they get to show their level of preparedness and value to an organization.
So I'll say it as bluntly as I possibly can. If you don't adopt any hardware and software, you're going to be out of a job in 5 years.
Mm,
Tops.
mm,
Like I would say, it's even going to happen faster. And I would come back and say, if you don't believe in it from improving communication between your coaches and your athletes, that's fine. It's your prerogative. But if you're not at least using it to substantiate and validate what you're doing in a strength conditioning perspective, you're doing a gross disservice to your athletes. You have no idea. You're going off a false notion that you're doing a good job when you're really probably
mm.
not. You're just thinking that you are based off of occupying space and time. If you have nothing to
Yeah.
objectively evaluate the job that you're doing, and you're
Yep.
just kind of relying on unrelated, uncorresponding metrics. Like if you squat more, that has zero relevance to be able to play football at a higher level unless you could definitively prove it. Like
Yeah.
there has to be a
Yeah.
direct 100% link
Yeah.
emphatically, right? Improving someone's strength that's irrelevant to what they need to do is not
Mhm.
your job. And do I think we need to get stronger? Yes. I would argue strength is not the mother of all qualities. It's a quality, it's something to develop, but it's not the end all be all. There's plenty of people who don't get quote unquote elite level strength who are incredibly successful. So that universal thought that strength is just in doing these arbitrary things and making someone better in this area that you wanted to do because you value it doesn't make you more valuable. And if you keep this dogma, so to speak, of only got to get them stronger, you're going to be out of a job.
Yeah.
Like this is it. Like that's the end. Here's your opportunity in front of you. It's hey, now we can evaluate who's doing good or who's doing not as good, better than we ever have before. Right? We can use
Mhm.
GPS data, heart rate data, force plate data. We can look at isolated joint testing. We can look at HRV, resting heart rate. We can look at blood pressure. We can look at heart rate recovery. We can look at things that are looking at, we actually have the ability now to look at NO production, lactate production without doing a muscle biopsy. I can look at it from infrared. I have this ability to do this stuff more so than I ever have. And it's cheap and it's easy and it's accessible. You could do that
Mhm.
now more so than you ever could. So you're going to
Yeah.
tell me you're doing a good job, that your 300-yard shuttles or your 110 test is getting them ready for camp. Prove it. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not
Yeah.
saying it's bad.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not. What I'm not saying is you now have to prove it. And if you
Yeah.
can't, you're gone. You're absolutely gone. Because
Mhm.
that's the issue. Is we've been going
Mhm.
off this incomplete knowledge with the association that we're doing a good job based off of great effort and great enthusiasm. But now you have to prove it. It can't hide as much as we used to. And that's a
Yeah.
good thing. It's a really good
Yes.
thing. Because generally
Yes.
speaking, I don't think anyone has any malicious intent when they're committed to a philosophy or ideology like squat, bench,
Right.
clean. Like I don't think they're out there to sabotage their program. But what I would say is you're going to get exposed if you're just completely locked in. This myopic thought process of all you got to do is these three things over and over and over again. Never change your progression from 1 week to the next. Never
Mhm.
change your thought process of why you would program a 3 versus a 4 day, whatever it is. You have
Yep.
no rationale to make any decision. So you just perpetuate the same decision over and over again. You can't live off that anymore. And
Yep.
again, from the standpoint of there's going to be really two vectors for sports science: is communicate to athletes and coaches more effectively to give more informed actual input, or it's going to be hold yourself to a higher standard. No matter what your thought process is, like, our coach doesn't believe in it. Who cares? Prove it to yourself. Prove that you're doing a good job. And when
Yeah.
it comes down to it, and you say, hey, I'm 2-10 and we got to make a change or we're all fired, and you go, well, I hope our coaches can recruit more. I'm not living off of that.
Yeah.
I'm saying, hey, if there's a 1% improvement versus a 2% improvement, and that's going to have a better chance to stay, I'm taking that. I think it's bigger. I really do. And you're going to sit there and say, well, it's hard to really say that you're bringing that much value. And I would argue, maybe you're right, but at least I'm trying, and at least I can prove it. And that's the issue where I think when people are restrictive or rigid or like looking at something as
Mhm.
the opportunity cost isn't there, you're probably going to get replaced by someone. The opportunity is not too big and the learning curve is not too steep. Like the simple, like, can you figure out Google Sheets or can you figure out a training platform online? Can you figure out how to look at dashboards? Can you figure out how to create an Excel table? Whatever the medium is, your inability to do that. And then it gets to the point of well, I know where that information is really going through. That assistant that's way more tech savvy or just way more committed, and then that
Yep.
head coach is standing in between the head football coach and then that assistant, and then that head football coach goes, just move out of the way, head strength coach. I'm just going to go straight to the source.
Yep.
And instead of watching that head strength coach try to fumble through a report or dashboard, and I I would argue like the rigidness and restrictiveness is the fear and the anxiety of like, what if I
Yep.
show vulnerability that I don't understand this or I don't know that? Like,
Yeah.
there, I
Yeah.
would not come back and say there's plenty of 50-year-old single moms learning coding in the middle of the night at night school to get a job. You can't learn this. Like, you have a master's degree and you can't learn Excel. Like, you're just being
Right.
lazy or being overly
Yes.
rigid for no reason. And I
Yeah.
would come back and say, too, the other part, it's evolution is a part of our world, right? Whether you look at that or not, like we are designing stress to change and evolve from one state of his organism to another. That's the premise of our job. We take an
Right.
athlete from one state to another, hopefully in a better state. And the idea is we're applying stress to force the
Yep.
right evolution, right? Entropy is
Yep.
occurring. We're trying to decrease that
Mhm.
entropy or chaos, and we're trying to
Mhm.
funnel that into a specific vector, hopefully better at their sport than what they were before or without us. Now, the other note, from a career perspective, we're doing the same thing. That there's a
Yep.
lot of chaos, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of variables. Like I have no control of a subjective appraisal of a football coach who's psycho. I don't have any ability to say, hey, that person, this is what matters.
Yeah.
But I can lean in on characteristics that matter to that person. And then on the other note, while that person is just a culture person, is all about just bringing energy and enthusiasm, you in the background are substantiating your program more effectively. You're going, I know we're doing a good job because our coach loves us. But on the other note, I know in between these four walls of a weight room, we're doing what's absolutely necessary and nothing else. We're never wasting time. We're never hemorrhaging out any opportunity. We're never
Right.
looking at our athletes saying, God, I hope this works. Well, this is what we did at this other place. It worked just fine. You guys are not the right, you guys are the wrong athletes with the right program. Like, that's not the way programming works. You have to meet your athletes with the perfect amount. And the other element of like, just to downplaying your significance, like, you may not make an impact, but I sure as hell am. I know I
Right.
am. I absolutely
Right.
do. And if you don't believe it, why are you doing this? Is it the money? We already talked about that. It's definitely not the money. So if you don't
Yeah.
believe that what you do matters, find something that you do believe matters. Become a
Yeah.
preacher, do something else. I don't care. But you're going to sit there and take time and opportunity away from a young person that's willing to go out there and bust their ass to learn things and grow and force evolution in a positive direction for our industry. So we can take that mean and bump it up as opposed to now
Mhm.
everyone's making 40 to 50. Like,
Yeah.
no, like let's raise the level through collective
Yeah.
understanding of that. Sports science is it's not it's not this notion that like it's it detracts from your job because I put in the book that there's according to like at least the latest 2037 or 2022 that there's a 37% chance that AI will replace personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches. So that's not a big number, to be honest. There's a lot of other
Right.
jobs
Right.
with
Right.
much
Right.
more
Right. Right.
risk,
Yeah.
which is a small probability, and it's going to replace
Yeah.
certain aspects, but it's going to replace bias and agenda with decision making. You're not going to have the luxury of deciding what sets reps programs to do here in not too distant future. And you take someone like myself, and I'll just say it, like I invested 20 years of my career reading, writing, learning, at least six figures in continuing education between my two undergraduate degrees, my two master's degrees, and countless certifications. And all of that, if you look at it in hindsight, was a bad investment because AI can go ahead and pump that in. For example, I really wanted to commit to understand cellular biology and really understand the impact of mitochondria and things like like the fourth phase of water. What is the easy zone and what's the impact in terms of circadian? What's the impact of looking at hydrogen ions versus other electrons? And all of that was really hard. And it's not something that I have a very good grasp of. And I still struggle to understand it to this day. But if you type in a couple keywords in ChatGPT, and I spent years, like years, trying to even come close to be able to explain that simple level of it. You just type in these four keywords of that for a chat GPT, it'll spit out everything I know and then some. That's what we're working with. And
Yeah.
one of the things was like, well, was that a waste of time? And I would argue no, because the process of learning and growing was the point, not the what I learned was the point. On the
Right.
other end, now when I look at a problem in front of me in a situation that doesn't have an answer that AI can't fix, I can at least start to make headway in there, and when AI can start to plug itself in. And then from the other level, if AI is better at writing a program and taking more details simultaneously than I can, and I could go out there and coach it more effectively because I got my reps. So if we look at internships, it's looking at guiding curriculums around, oh, we got to teach them every single variable, sets reps, all the things that NSCA is doing or what their undergrad should have done. You might be better served talking about career planning. You might be better served to go ahead and work on actually the skill of coaching. And if you look at it from being on the floor, the ability to connect, the ability to read people, the ability to make rapid decisions based off of body language, the positioning, the range of motion, all these variables coming at us simultaneously, because we are a supercomputer in certain areas and reactive energy, we can figure out how we can bring value. And the question would be, is that worth 6, 7 figures? I think yes. I think actually it'd be worth more, because once we realize that there's going to be an issue with there's certain things that AI or artificial intelligence or machine learning simply can't do, that we can't replicate that, and that becomes more and more value. The question is, are you any good at it? And can you objectively evaluate that, right? The necessary pivots in a program, right? I wrote 4 sets of 10 for the next 4 weeks, progressively overloading 5% over the course of 4 weeks.
Sure.
Great. That's whatever decision I make. Now, when we get
Sure.
to week 3 and that person slept 2 hours, decide not to progress, we stayed the same weight, and we just gave them a lot of positive encouragement. Hopefully for week 4, that manifests into a 7.5% improvement or a 10% improvement. Maybe, maybe not. What we need to evaluate, though, is those decisions and our pivoting and go, okay, well, was that a good or bad decision? And can we debrief and fix that next time? And that's where we're really going to be holding to a higher standard. And you look at objectively evaluating all the workload, heart rate, trimp, everything else that we can do. We get into this next level of the subjective decisions that we make in a moment based off what we thought was best for that situation. Person with experience, person with wisdom is going to make a better decision over time because they can process and have better bandwidth from learned experiences. Younger person's not going to be able to. So that really expedited fast track process of people getting into a head strength coach status quickly is going to be lessened and slowed down and blunted, because that's not as given right away. And the value is going to be tied into experience and wisdom over energy and enthusiasm and capable of doing stuff early on. That's now valuable, but not going to be as valuable in a very short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that stuff, I think you're already seeing the evolution now, where it's like what was rewarded then was, energy, enthusiasm, and are you a juice guy, and are you kind of a psycho to an extent? And I don't mean that in a negative way, but like, are you just the loud, crazy guy that gets everybody going, right? And that's what people saw as a benefit to, hey, you should be ready for this position. But now it's taking a step back, and it's a more analytical approach. It's a, hey, let's be slow to think, or fast to think, but slow to make decisions, or and actually understanding the gravity of everything, and comprehending it all, and being analytical with approach. It's more so, instead of throwing shit at a wall and hoping it sticks, it's a more detailed approach and saying, okay, based off what I do know and what I have experienced, it's X, rather than, well, let's try 18 different things, and I hope it actually is the right one, or which one is the right one. We don't know, because I'm into data. I think data is extremely important. I think it's, to your point, I agree. I think if you're not doing data, it's only going to expose you faster, because you don't know what you don't know, because you don't have anything to back it up. Like, that's why businesses track all this data now, and that's what helps their businesses, be more successful faster, right? So why wouldn't you do the same thing from your standpoint as a strength and conditioning coach? I advise strength coaches to run their department as a business. Like, think about how you can do that. Think about what you need to do, how you need to track it. You can make money as a strength and conditioning department by doing conferences and hosting things, and showing other people, like, hey, I'm doing more than everybody else, aka hopefully therefore more valuable, therefore worth more money. But I'm learning, I'm doing all these things that help with that. And you can actually now make improvements upon your not only individual program, but your department as well, and continue to push the needle forward, rather than relying on one person that does all the work and everybody else is just a juice guy. And it's just like, that doesn't seem to make much sense to me. That's more of the football world. I'm not in the football world. And so, but that's what it appears. In the football world, you're the speed guy, you're the strength guy, you're the data guy, you're the head guy who just manages everybody. And it's like, okay, well, don't you think all of you should probably be able to do all of this? Because what if you go to a different staff and you were the speed guy, but now you have to do the data guy because they already got their speed guy, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I think at times they kind of pigeonhole themselves a little bit, but you got to brand yourself too as like, I'm this guy. So if you need this guy, call me, per se. But anyways, it's really interesting. Okay, so your second book then is also very interesting. Strength Deficit. What kind of made you what gave you the idea to be like, okay, now I'm even more so interested in this, because we kind of just talked about the career strategy as a strength coach, but strength deficit in general, like how did that one come about for you?
Necessity. We were really bad at Army, and I decided to evolve our program in a positive direction. We didn't have the luxury of really good football players and
Yeah.
hyper
Yeah.
developed guys. So finding really creative ways to push the needle performance and close the gap, that was our whole goal. And the other part, I think there's also a level of we probably generically prescribe stuff for the notion that it's easier to be good at something simple as opposed to having a lot of nuance and a lot of variables to account for within a program. And at a point in my time in Army, there was a very distilled down, simplistic program. And as that evolved, that became less and less valuable through collection of data and information. And then it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's look at this. So if we're going to break down strength deficit, it's looking at the ratio of concentric versus eccentric. The test we use is looking at a non-counter movement versus a counter movement jump. Ideally, typically you see counter movement jump being higher than non-counter movement jump, which the ability to leverage a stretch shortening cycle would be greater evolving to increase counter movement jump. Now, in regards to what that means programming wise, how does that relate to certain positions on the field or certain events in track? You start to think about where is a counter movement jump more valuable, and the notion that improving counter movement jump overall is valuable is, yeah, early on that's important, but as we start to move towards whatever you call sports mastery or specific physical preparation or the getting closer and closer to whatever your peak is and your opportunity to play, we start to really focus on certain metrics, and
Mm-hmm.
a interior lineman is going to have drastically different needs and
Yeah.
criteria that makes them successful comparatively speaking to a wide receiver. And that was the genesis of that, like finding what metrics are really relevant to the positions and finding out how to change that. So if I was going to focus on improving stretch shortening cycle, and we go through this very generic football template of very acceleration heavy, very concentrically strength oriented, we're going to do a great disservice to that. And I think that's why we see a lot of early peaks with counter movement jump attributed to increasing just force early on, which most novices will
Yep.
make changes. Increasing cross-sectional muscle area will make changes in that area. And then
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
kind of plateau for a while. On the
Right.
other note, maybe counter movement jump is tapped out, but maybe there's qualities within that counter movement jump like reactive strength index and concentric peak force, or
Mm-hmm.
looking at eccentric peak force
Mm-hmm.
and looking at
Mm-hmm.
the rate of force development as much as anything. You can extrapolate that out and looking at potentially a force velocity profiling or a depth jump
Yeah.
profiling, or looking at
Yep.
counter movement jump
Yep.
versus a extensive plyo like a extensive hop test on four stack
Mm-hmm.
or a
Yep.
four jump on a just jump. But then the other note, it's, let's say that interior lineman kind of plateaus in terms of counter movement jump and actually starts to regress because they gain a ton of body mass. And to be honest, that actually might not be a big deal or problem. And we
Right.
should see corresponding increasing in strength. We should see corresponding increasing in force output because they are bigger. And that's a good thing, but how are we supporting it's the right amount of body mass, relatively speaking, to muscle mass? And that's when we started looking at other metrics like counter movement jump. And
Mm-hmm.
the area that started to evolve from that is, well, if we know we got to focus on increasing more elastic qualities with our perimeter athletes, how should we address our training session and microcycle and even our meso and our macro cycle? And the same thing for interior linemen that need to improve their ability to produce force in a very small confined space. How would that improve change or alter our training session, microcycle, mesocycle, macrocycle, and that's
Mhm.
where we're really starting to work through. And the programming from there is where really the quote unquote magic, because less about the test. The test is fine. Like test is like, okay,
Yep.
now I got a better starting point and a better
Mhm.
idea of, okay, this offensive lineman can only counter him and jump 19 inches, but he's really good. So I guess that 19 inches in terms of a standard isn't really that meaningful or impactful.
Right.
You know, that
Right.
guy's an All-American. He's going to be a second-round draft pick, first-day draft pick, and he's only jumping 17 inches. Like, is it that important? And I've seen that
Yeah.
example quite frankly too many times to say that counter movement jump is important overall. But it's important, but it's not the end all be all. But it doesn't necessarily mean that that would be the right test, right? Measure what matters and find what's relevant, and what corresponds is what the goal here. Once we do that, though, then you're forced with the situation of, okay, well, I have a very specific target. And the metaphor we give within the book, it's okay, you are at a roulette table and you
Mhm.
know that the number is going to land on this specific number because someone in the casino told you that there's a magnet underneath that. And then you have this internal dialogue of like, well, do I really believe this person? And do I put all the chips on that number, knowing that if I do win, it's going to be big? Versus the other end, you go, well, I'm just going to spread the chips out because I'm going to stay with what I know and try to increase my odds of winning overall, but not winning as much. And I
Yep.
always look at it from, if you know what the rules, if you know what the outcome is, you just need to focus on that. So marry yourself to outcomes, not solutions. But then once you
Mm.
understand the outcome, find the solution that makes that outcome occur. And that's what our program became. It became stop doing stuff that's irrelevant. And the other part, in which I go back to the original point of, we write these very simplistic, generic programs based off what we think we can be more effective with one program with a large group. Problem is, we're always programming to lowest common denominator, meaning that
Yep.
when we look at offensive linemen and
Mhm.
applying metrics, we're programming to them, not the elite level power athletes and relative strength athletes we have with perimeter guys. So that might mean we're going to omit things like bounding or depth jumps. In terms of speed development, a lot of football will be focused on acceleration, which is fine. A lot of backside development. And that's going to improve a lot, but it's not necessarily going to be holistic for developing a guy who needs to be really good in space, or a guy who has to run down on kickoff, who actually has to hit that front side mechanic or hit top end speed. Okay,
Yep.
well, that becomes a limiting factor because I don't want to run a 300-pound offensive lineman doing a flying 40. They're going to tear a hamstring.
Right.
But then the other no, it's maybe I'm just now programming to the big guy, and we say we want our big guys super athletic, like our skill and combo guys, and we run them. We run them too much, and they can't get to a certain body mass, or they're constantly in an overstrained state because they're doing this high eccentric elastic load. And you
Yeah.
start to look at them underserving them, and then it gets into this situation of like, once we kind of got past what we need to do and what we need to focus on, it became a really hard conversation of the logistics to change that. So we changed our training session, we changed our microcycle, we changed everything, but it really hit the road of, okay, well, now we got to figure out how we're going to execute on this program at a high level. Helps of being an Army where you have really good kids, they're smart, they're intuitive. We had really good staff, like
Yeah.
a really
Yeah.
elite staff, and a lot of trust with their staff, and a lot of rapport with the staff saying, I'm going to depend on you to be the person here. You know, do you feel comfortable and confident with the group? If this isn't going the way you wanted to, can you pivot in the right manner, in the right time? Or do you know when to double down and push? And there's a
Yeah.
lot of like, hey, I'm going to develop certain triggers to initiate when to pivot, or certain triggers when to double down and stay with what we're doing. But that became the logistics that we needed to figure out of, okay, I'm going to have offensive and defensive linemen over here. I'm going to have skill guys over there. Now I'm going to have some sort of program written for them. We're going to decrease our coach to athlete ratio because I have one coach there, and I'm going to be kind of splitting my time between the two. We'll have one team in one aspect, one side of the ball in the weight room, the other side of the ball out in the field. There's just a lot more things to account for with a program like this. And in
Yep.
the end, it's always going to fall down to two things. It's either your hypothesis of training, meaning your rationale is well thought out and planned, or your execution of training. And if we have the right hypothesis with poor execution, we'll not have a good program. If we have
Right.
the wrong hypothesis, good execution, there's a chance we could still be successful. So it's a big risk. It's a big risk. And when we increase
Mm.
our nuance and the variables we have to account for, we're decreasing our odds of being higher execution. So what I would come back, and this is always the disclaimer in the book, it's this isn't a perfect fit everywhere. this is a very situational dependent program. And if you're working with a couple skill guys in the offseason, you might want to double down and increasing the deficit. If you're working with a couple offensive linemen in the offseason, you might want to double down and decrease the deficit. If you have a really utopia society of a really great group of kids that are bought in, care about it, are smart, they're intuitive, they listen, they want to be great, with a bunch of coaches that are absolute savages on the floor and programming wise and have great instinct and natural ability to do it, you'd be dumb not to, in my opinion. And the results speak for themselves, right? Like we were able to figure out how to improve non-common jump for our decrease in the deficit athletes, our offensive linemen, our defensive linemen, our linebackers, our B-backs, our tight ends. And we were able to increase the deficit for our wide receivers, our defensive backs, our slots, our quarterbacks. And best year we had there. First time we beat Navy in 15 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the residuals, a concentric circle offense, immense. And when you get to a situation with like basketball or baseball, it's like you know what this, how to leverage increasing or decreasing the deficit is. It's kind of your job to figure out what archetype your basketball player or football or your baseball player falls in, right? If you have a power hitting first baseman, you might want to decrease the deficit. If you have a center fielder that you really need to be able to run the base as well, you might want to increase the deficit. But we all know that fluctuates and ebbs and flows, right? Like that's not a ironclad fixed thing, and football is nice because it falls into these very typecasted stereotypes of, oh, you're an offensive lineman, be 300 pounds and be tough and be physical. Like pretty simple to figure that out. They're as close to a shot putter and this very specific criteria as you possibly can within one team, and it becomes a little more indistinguishable what the difference is between a power forward and a small forward in basketball is. And that's kind of your job to figure that out and what works for your situation. But it's more of the model, and not all models are useful in every situation, but they exist and they can be beneficial to know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's absolutely fantastic. And for those that don't do this, what you just explained is, I think, the way a thought process should be, and how you should attempt to attack making your athletes better, or in your words, reducing the deficit. And if you want like something that's more in depth for basketball specifically, I think Takeoff by Danny Bove is fantastic as well. Gives you a more in depth specifically for basketball on the 4-stack component, and his entire athlete framework I think is awesome. And that's more like basketball focused because obviously he's at the NBA level and all that other stuff. I think he does a great job. But it's really interesting because, to that exact point, that is something that I'm working on currently. Where I'm at is like, okay, what are minimum standards that we need for positions, and then like as a whole, and for 1 through 5, like you're saying, like the difference between them really from like 3 to 5 isn't that great, right? You're like, you guys are kind of all sort of the same, but sort of different. I mean, there's a little difference, but not a lot. And like, what does that look like? And how can I, help with that? And I was having a great conversation the other day about, muscle driven athletes based compared to elastic driven athletes, and what the differences look like for that and basketball. And these guys are jumpers and they like to jump, and what gives them confidence. And if you look at counter movement jump, well, jump height is a byproduct of other things. So, if you stress the other things, then the jump height component should hopefully then increase, right? But what are those other things? How do they respond to them? And you just have to have a super deep level of thought process to that. But then, to your point, well, if the guy didn't sleep, or like for us, we have 13 straight road games. Well, how does that affect all of that? Well, it definitely affects it a lot, and how they come in and how they prepare, and they didn't eat and this and this and that. So there's a lot of other things that come at play with it, and it's really interesting. But I think that is the way, if people are young or they don't think of that way, I think that's the way that they do need to approach it, which then goes back to our previous conversation of, well, this is how you use objective data to push your program forward too. Because if you don't have that objective data and you don't test and retest, not just once a year, twice a year, but consistently, then you're not actually being able to say, we are making this athlete potentially better, or at least we're reducing this component, this deficit component of it, which we believe could correlate to them becoming a better athlete on the field, whatever the case may be, right? And so it's a whole circle. It's everything works together. Everything's a piece of the puzzle, but you have to utilize it all congruently and synergistically in order to see an improvement. And then you can have the depth and the breadth behind it to say, well, I should expect that from my hypothesis, as you say. I should expect this as an outcome, because if we understand physiology and if we understand bioenergetics, if we understand all these other things and we have objective data to show us that, then we should hopefully see this adaptation. We should see this change. We should see this increase with all of our guys, because, well, we tied in science and tied in analytics or tied in data to, and make an informed thought process to make them better and write a program based off what we know that physiology responds to. Well, there we go. Let's test it and try it. And so to me, that's where the value, and that to me is extremely valuable. Like, that to me is if you can articulate that consistently, year in and year out, or a non-conference season to a conference season, preseason, all the different phases, that to me is worth a lot of money, honestly.
Mhm.
But a lot of people don't see it that way, but that's interesting. So, okay, one last question here for you. So from a business perspective, because obviously we've talked a lot from a strength and conditioning standpoint, which is outstanding, and the way you articulate things, I think, is fantastic, and it makes a lot of sense to me, because that's how my brain is thinking as well. I'm like, yes, 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 yes. And also because I consume a lot of your information. So I'm like, absolutely. But from a business standpoint, then, if strength coaches are considering making a transition, or they're saying, you know what, I want to own a business, I want to open my own facility, very general question, but what advice would you give them? Because that is a different characteristic, skill sets that are required. Because to what you said earlier is, a lot of people necessarily don't care that you were a strength coach prior to. They don't care that you were a juice guy. They may not even care what teams you worked with prior to. It's, what can you do for me today? But the idea then is to remove yourself from being on the floor, and now you're actually running a business that makes a profit, that makes money, that helps people. How did that transition go for you is my question. And then looking back now, what do you think you could have, done better, and how could that have helped you if you were to do it again?
I think most strength and conditioning coaches are probably leaving because they're upset, or they didn't have an opportunity, or they had a violent departure. They got fired or something.
Yeah.
I would argue that's an awful reason to start a business.
Yeah.
I look at it, when there's a reason why you should start a business, because you're running towards an opportunity. You see a problem, you want to fix it. You should never run from something else. And when you're breaking down what a business is, it's a opportunity to provide a service or a goods to someone that needs it, based off of you having a skill set or knowledge or ability to do something. And the question would be is, how do you want that business to operate? And a lot of times we have this false notion of what a private strength conditioning facility is. And just look at CrossFit, for example. Like, a
Yeah.
lot of these people who opened up a CrossFit had the right motives and right intentions, but it became exhausting because they weren't very skilled either in the actual idea of strength conditioning or performance training. So
Yeah.
their product was bad. Then the other notion, it's they really didn't have the aptitude to sell their business. They don't know how to market. They don't know how to get people to buy something. Then the other part is they don't have the actual grit to manage a business,
Yeah.
and doing the hard things and making that thing operate. And when I start to look at it from what I want to accomplish as a business owner, it's having a scaled business that serves a lot of people over the greater United States and maybe beyond. And then what is my role with that? It's putting other people in position to do the day-to-day job. Now, with
Mm-hmm.
that being said, is I have a lot more skin in the game having equity in my company and a lot of my
Yep.
namesake and my reputation attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
So the jobs that need to get done, like the cleaning the bathrooms or fixing something that's broken, that falls on the business owner. The other jobs of getting out in front of customers and clients, your job is to facilitate them and giving them the right tools and knowledge and the incentive, aka compensation, to do their job. And if they have the right tools and the right knowledge and the right incentives and they still don't do it, you have to be comfortable firing them and you have to be comfortable moving on from them. And these are all things as a business owner that if you start to look at it, if I'm running from my job because I was upset because I didn't get a promotion that I wanted, or they don't value me, so I'm going to leave there and do something else, or I got fired. Like the amount of gyms that started is from someone getting fired is immense. And you
Yeah.
start to look at it from the context of, oh man, they're going to get exposed when it gets to the product, or they're going to get exposed from the selling of their business, or they're going to get exposed from the managing. And then it starts to go into, well, if you don't really have a good rationale of what training is, or you don't know what you're selling and you don't know how to manage it, you're going to pivot by the wind. And the original pretense of why you opened a business for solving a problem that you thought was necessary. Like my whole thing is there's just crap training out there. The barrier of entry from starting a business or having a strength conditioning program is really low. So I thought there would be a great opportunity financially, as well as a opportunity personally to provide a higher quality experience and service. But the reason why it hasn't been done before is probably because it's hard to do, or probably because people don't really inherently or value it. So then you reach this brick wall of, well, I don't know what your value prop is, or I don't know why I should sign up with you versus someone else. And I find if you don't have the right reasons and context of why you start a business, you are going to fail miserably. And that's what the odds usually are. The same story of the 90s and 2000s of starting a bar or opening a restaurant now is gyms. And there's no shortage of gyms. There's like 40,000 gyms registered, I think, in California alone. That's an absurd number. And it employs like millions of people. And you see that number pretty much stay the same, but there's probably a 25% turnover year over year. And that means that a lot of people are like 20,000 or 10,000 gyms are just churning into a new gym every year or 5 year cycle. And it goes from the simple premise of like, did you have the right reasons why you're doing this in the first place? And the other part, it's, man, you got to have you want to talk about having some real like grit and toughness and like, oh yeah, we all volunteered and we all sacrificed and, done what we had to do to get that college or team sector job. You have no idea when you're in the private sector, and either you are aged out of like doing the hard things and you're just not willing to put in a line like that anymore, or you're just naive to that wasn't really that hard. That was something that you really wanted to do that had a potential for a huge upside. The honeymoon wore off, and now you're in a situation where it's like you actually got some skin in the game. You got some money invested. You got some time invested. You got your reputation at stake. You're going to have to really be quick to change and redirect, and your ego gets checked. Your personal sense of righteousness gets checked. You don't have that luxury anymore. And again, like I said at the beginning, I serve 25 coaches, and they're collectively depending on me to be detached of ego and pride and this righteousness that I have as a strength coach that worked as a elite level college strength coach that made a profound difference for thousands of athletes over my 14-year college strength conditioning career. Like that doesn't mean anything if I'm making a bad or poor decision today, or I'm being lazy in certain areas, or I'm not doing the jobs that need to get done. And that's the problem. It's it's going to fall down to people, process, product. And if you don't have the right people, the right process, the right product, like you're going to fail. And I would come back and say, like, you don't need to open up a business to validate you. Like you don't. Like we don't need more gyms. Like, to be honest, quite frankly, we probably need less. And we don't need more gyms failing, and we don't need more strength coaches going out there opening up their own business and doing a crappy job, making the whole industry harder to transition. Right? I was a college strength coach, and you should be really grateful for that, and I'm classified as that. And then you open up a business, and you're not good with customers, or you're not good at selling what you do. And you like the same thing when you have that opportunity with the head coach. You're like, hey, like, what should we do here? And you're like, like you want to do good, you want to try hard, you want to get just all about getting strong. And then you get that in front of a customer, and they're like, I don't know, he's kind of a jerk. Like, watch some of these videos about what they're celebrating and what they're perpetuating, and you see, like, all right, there's 50-year-olds doing squat, bench, deadlift, and putting on belts and wearing knee wraps and wrist sleeves. Like, is that in their best interest to have a 55-year-old who doing a max effort deadlift? Like, I'm all
Yeah.
for deadlifts and hinging, but like, are we
Yeah.
really putting that person's best interest at heart? And like, I think that's what someone who doesn't have any context of what the consequence of that would be. Of like, oh, I just read this program on Reddit and I went into a local Planet Fitness and I just maxed out on deadlift because that was what someone on Reddit said is the fastest way to get stronger, putting on muscle will feel better. That's what a amateur would do. But
Mm.
a professional, someone that understands has the burden of knowledge and knowing that doing contraindicated things has a consequence, and you are responsible for that. I have a whole module on my website about negligence
Mhm.
versus ignorance. You don't have the luxury of being ignorant. You're just now flat out being negligent. For
Yeah.
what? You're proving your agenda, your bias, or it's easier sell, or momentum's going in that direction. So we're just going to go there and follow that. Like, you have an obligation to do the right thing because you're the professional and the expectations there to do what's right. And if you don't, because you don't really have a right premise for opening up a business, you probably shouldn't open up a business in the first place. And that, I think that's the heart of the issue. It's, the business itself is, you have to understand it's not necessarily your skill set or your knowledge or your ability to coach that really makes a business successful. It's a bigger systemic thing, and it's understanding your role. And the joke is it's very like it's capitalism, it's entrepreneurship, but the actual internal structure is extremely proletariat. Like, everyone's got a job to do, and
Mm.
everyone's feeding into, as we call it, mother allegiant. And if the whole machine breaks down because one part, i.e., me, decides that I don't feel like doing what I'm responsible for doing, and my job is transition from direct A to B, right of our customer, to behind the scenes and greasing the wheels and making sure there's enough coal in the engine so that conductor
Yeah.
looks good when we're getting to the end stop. That becomes a problem. And
Yeah.
I have to take some sort of inventory of how I contribute and how I make this thing work. And it might not be directly getting credit, or it might not be getting the slap on the back of like, I was first time able to do a pull up is here, and I got to give all the credit to this coach. Like, you have to be really comfortable and confident with your contribution to that, but knowing that that person in front of there is going to get credit. And I think that takes a certain level of discipline, and you might leave a college sector because you want more of that recognition, notoriety, and you might name it Tim Caron Performance, where you do get a lion's share of that, but you might not be able to keep
Yeah.
employees year over year, and you sacrifice that. And there's a whole lot of elements of this, but
Yeah.
like, and I
Yeah.
talk about it in the book, like, it's just it's not like the only path afterwards, right? And I've talked to enough coaches that are teetering and going on the fence of like, should I leave or should I go? Like, start digital trading and see if you can sell
Yep.
yourself that way. And if you can't convince someone remotely to buy your stuff, you're probably not going to convince them with a brick and mortar overhead and operating budget. So minimize risk and see what you're good and get
Yeah.
good at that. Like, it's
Yeah.
weird that
Yep. Yep.
transition to go, hey, by the way, can you pay me for this? Right? You probably feel anxious and awkward of, hey,
Mhm.
I'm gonna write your program and it's gonna cost you, this amount per month or this amount per
Yep.
week. And they're gonna be like, oh, well, I thought you were a buddy. And you have to navigate that because not everyone's your friend. Because if you can't, no one pays you, you don't make money. And you have a skill set and knowledge and ability. And if that's not valuable, then you need to find other people and you need to convince them that you're valuable and knowledgeable and skilled. And it's just a lot. And so, the element of opening a business, like, it's romantic. It's the
Yeah.
it's an option.
Yeah.
But honestly, I don't think it's a 100% natural transition for every strength coach, because
Yeah.
there's a lot to consider and there's a lot to personally inventory of yourself and what you really want. Again, going back to why and what you want. And like, if, hey, I want to coach, I just want to go to work and I want a very simple life. And I don't mind making 50K a year. I like working with athletes because I find they're most energetic. I understand there's going to be some downsides to that and some bads. And I'm accruing more good days than bad days. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. Like, it's great. If you're looking for
Right.
a plan B and you're looking for some sort of option after the fact, and you start to look at, well, what would be my limiting factor if I was going to open up a business? Is it my managerial skills? Is
Mhm.
my sales skills? My marketing skills? Is it my programming or
Yep.
absolute like strength conditioning ability? You start to look at that and say, okay, well, I need to work on that before I consider that, or find someone
Yeah.
that's capable of doing that for me.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And then, you have the entire aspect as well from a business standpoint of like how much is it going to cost you as well. And then a lot of businesses, I think the average business owner makes like, I think I read a statistic. I want to say it's like in the 30s or $40,000 range a year or something like that. So it's like, if you're doing it from a financial standpoint, like I'm just going to make all this money now. Well, maybe that's not entirely true either, right? So if you think now all of a sudden I'm going to go from making $50,000 as a strength coach at a university to now opening my own business and I'm now going to make 120, 150. Well, maybe, but maybe not as well, especially probably not right away, right? And so there's a lot of other stuff that goes into it that a lot of people may not think about. They don't understand how to think about it though either. And so that's really interesting to have them consider that, because it seems like a natural transition for people. Like, I'm just going to go in the gym setting now in the private world, but it's completely different. The thought process is different as well. And you're not necessarily always valued for what you can do on the floor, your ability to program, especially if you're going to be an owner. Right. And so that's different. But, so Tim, this has been fantastic. I'm not going to lie. It's really been great. And I feel like we're just scratching the surface of your knowledge and experience and thought processes from not only from strength and conditioning, but from a business standpoint. But where can people find you online if they want to get in contact with you? And then where's the best place for them to continue listening to your podcast and learn from you?
Coach Tim Caron Instagram. I'm not great on Twitter. I find that's kind of a toxic place, but you can find me there. And then phpodcast.com. I have several resources. I have standalone courses, 2 on strength deficit, 1 on how to become a strength coach, 2 books, how to become a strength coach, strength deficit. So you can purchase those. So if I just want to get a short-term experience, like A to B, something that I can finish and move on, great. You have an option there. And then we have a membership platform where you can sign up for membership, get access to pretty dialed in curriculum and a lot of like actual practical resources that is expanding and growing. And that's going to be $20 a month that you can just stay on. You can stop and start whenever you want. It gets you access to a forum, accessibility to me, all that. So phpodcast.com is the probably go-to spot to get all the education resources. And then I offer consults, workshops, mentorships, and then what I call audits, where I go in there and just completely crank on your facility and go, okay, like this has got to get better, or we could find a better way to do this, and just start to finish, A to B, make you the most robust strength and conditioning staff in the country.
Sure. That's awesome. Yeah, guys, go to phpodcast.com. If you've never been on his website, I think you will find yourself spending a lot of time there, reading the blogs and then going through the courses and listening to his podcast as well. So if you are listening and if you made it this far, which I think you should, because this was a very engaging conversation and intellectually challenging for those of you that are in the strength and conditioning field, that you're like, I have a lot of questions on this. But anyway, so Tim, I want to thank you for your time, man. Guys, go reach out to him, go on his website, listen to his podcast, purchase his books. And then if you can get to a live workshop that he does, do that as well. I have never been, but I've heard nothing but great things. I got to speak with a couple of friends of mine that went to yours in Houston, and they said that it was just absolutely amazing from top to bottom, start to finish. So appreciate you and everything that you're doing. I want to thank you for your time and your thought process on a multitude of topics, because it was just absolutely outstanding, not only for myself, but for everybody listening as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. And look, here's the deal. If you got something from this, share the show. Okay, that's how the show goes. So do us a huge favor, share the show, leave a review, and then reach out to Tim and let him know what a great job he did, and see how you can continue to learn and grow from him, or bounce any questions off of him that you may have, because this was absolutely outstanding. So until then, Tim, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Guys, we'll catch y'all on the next one.